2010, November 22, commencing at 7 o'clock, right on the mark. And so I'd like to call the meeting of Council to order, and could I ask Ms. Harrison if you would introduce the late items, please.
Under Mayor's report, we're adding an update on Safer Nanaimo by Councillor Unger.
Okay, that'll be item 7, under 7?
That's correct. We're deleting item 11J under staff reports, structure removal order, a legal secondary suite at 2136 Dugan Road. We're replacing page 91, information only items, report from Chief R. Lambert, Nanaimo Fire Rescue, regarding bylaw to recover the costs of providing 911 services by means of a call answer levy.
Thank you.
Move adoption of the agenda.
Seconder, moved and seconded. All those in favour? Opposed? Carried. Adoption of the minutes as circulated.
This is circulated.
Moved and seconded. All those in favour? Opposed? Carried. Into presentations, and the first presentation that I'd like to make on behalf of Council is for the presentation of the Freedom of the City Award. And I want to point out before we start that this is a very prestigious award, and there are 2 recipients in attendance now. This particular award, the unique part of it is that it has to be voted on and approved by everyone on Council. The vote must be unanimous. If there's a dissent, it doesn't proceed. So we're so pleased that we will be making this presentation in a few moments to one of Nanaimo's hardest working citizens, and a lady that I have undying respect for, Muriel McKay-Ross. And Muriel is here. So what we'll do is I'll ask my fellow councillors if they could form up in front of the desk here, and we'll have the medallion and the actual presentation certificate too. And then, of course, we'll have to have Ms. McKay down for this as well. So thank you. You know, before I start, I would just like to... Yes? No, wait. That we're going to make the presentation. But before I start, I would just wanted to say that there's 2... Ken Medland is in the crowd with us here, and also Bob Rowledge. And both of these people are previous recipients of this. So yes, thank you very much for standing. As I mentioned, this is an award that's the highest award we can give anyone in the community. And I unfortunately don't have the time to read the 3 pages of accomplishment that Miriam McKay-Ross has given here. All I can say is it starts in 1948 and ends up today. So it's a very extensive... Well, it doesn't end up today. I mean, as of today. But, no, I want you to. No. There's bigger accomplishments yet to come. That was the message. But the other thing is, I think it's important. I did want to simply mention that this year, in 2010, you also received the BC Community Achievement Award from the Lieutenant Governor in Victoria. Some of us on Council had the opportunity to be there, and it was indeed a very special occasion as well. But this is the creme de la creme, of course, and naturally, with all due respect to the Lieutenant Governor. Whoops. So what I'll do now is start with the medallion, and the medallion is right here, where I carefully place it so I wouldn't forget it. And thank you, Lloyd. So it is indeed my honor, and it is a true honor, on behalf of Council to present... Yeah, I'm just going to show this thing here, but I just wanted to see it. I was afraid I wouldn't be able to get the thing out of here safely here. And you can keep this jeweler box, too. That was... So this is the award. Thanks, Lloyd. This is the award, and on the back of it, it says, presented to Muriel McKay-Ross, 2010, October 25. And this is something we've all looked forward to, and I can tell you no more deserving person exists in Nanaimo than Muriel McKay-Ross, in my opinion. So it's my pleasure, Muriel. We're going to bestow this honor on you. Try not to hook on your earrings or anything. Oh, here we go. It looks like it was designed for you. And thank you. Yeah. I might just mention, and Councillor Sherry reminded me that the reason for the date on the medallion, which is obviously different from today, reflects the date that the council unanimously passed it. So it's on that date that this award was given, and that's why the date shows on the back of it. So just in case Muriel says, hey, wait a minute, that's not today. It is. That's as close as we can get for you. And look at this award here. This is really... See, aren't you glad you have at least two sons-in-law that can carry this for you, because it's pretty heavy. Maybe... Oh, sorry. Certificate of Freeman for Muriel McKay Ross. At an in-camera meeting of the Nanaimo City Council for the year 2010, duly convened in the boardroom at City Hall in the City of Nanaimo, Province of British Columbia on Monday, the 18th day of October 2010, the following resolution was passed by unanimous vote, namely, that in pursuance of the powers invested in the City Council by statute, the freedom of the City of Nanaimo be and is hereby conferred on Muriel McKay Ross in recognition and appreciation for her outstanding contributions and the eminent public services rendered her to the City of Nanaimo. Witness the signatures of the member of council, and these are all the members of council, and the seal of the Corporation of Nanaimo, British Columbia, this 25th day of October 2010. It's signed by everyone on council. Larry McNabb included. And yeah, that's right. Thank you for pointing that out. And Larry, unfortunately, couldn't make it here tonight, but he did want you to know that he was totally supportive and very appreciative that you're receiving this recognition.
I sent a letter to Larry McNabb and told him that we had watched him play hockey as a team player, and he carried that right through to City Council. He always had a great effort and put a great deal of effort into every deliberation that they had to do, and came forward as a team and shared it with his council members. And then they made the decision. He was a true trooper, as the word could be, and is one man that I honor greatly for everything that he's done, not only for City Council, but for the youth of Nanaimo, where he portrayed a wonderful legend for every young child that ever passed through his doorstep. Thank you very kindly.
Well said. So we're going to have... Does anyone else want to do some pictures here? That those who first have the camera, naturally, but right? But we'll get some, and then Cam. Okay, wait. Go ahead.
We're not in this one, yeah. Really nice.
I agree with that. Right? Thank you. Try to get everyone in this time, right? The guys in the end had a little beginning.
Need a parking pass yet?
That's the bonus.
Just so much fun.
You have so much power. You have so much power, Jeff.
It's amazing.
Everybody stood up and left.
As soon as they're all gone, we'll vote on the taxes.
Hey, Jimmy, people usually do that when I walk in.
this isn't tonight. Is it under presentations? Is Brian Clements going to do that tonight?
So then we
Okay.
so the 10 minute or 15?
Yeah, we'll take maybe just a couple minutes to let the audience reconvene downstairs. And also we'll have Brian Clements, Director of Finance for the City of Nanaimo, get organized with this presentation regarding the 2011-2015 financial plan. Thank you. So, I see crowd is decidedly smaller now, so this might be the time. So, without further ado, we'll ask Brian Clements, Director of Finance, if he would provide the presentation. Is it an audio-visual you have for it? Okay, please, I'll turn over to you.
Thank you, Your Worship. So this is the 2011 to 2015 financial plan, usually referred to as the budget. The budget was first presented to Council last Monday, and it remains in draft form until it's actually approved by Council, so you can assume the word draft all the way through this. To anybody who has seen this presentation before, there are a couple of minor changes in the presentation, but this is substantially the same presentation that Council received last Monday. So the agenda. So what are we going to talk about today? So I'm going to talk a little bit about the budget process, how we put it together, the status of the taxation increase, what's in the budget. I'll explain some stuff around taxation, a very short section on reserves and surpluses and debt. And it says wrap up, but really it's finished at that point. The process. So this is a process that's been going on for a long time. It actually started back in June of 2010. So what happens is the budget starts at the departmental level, and the budget's prepared by line managers and frontline staff at each departmental level. That gets reviewed within each department, and there's some slightly different processes between different departments. For example, the Parks, Recreation and Culture department has a review that's done by the Commission as well. Once it's finished at the department level, it's passed over to finance staff for review and to make sure that it complies with all the rules and regulations that were put in place when we sent it out for assembly. Then it's reviewed by senior management. At that point, we look to see if any adjustments are required to keep it within the guidelines that have been provided by Council. The City Manager will make some recommendations on higher service levels, and then the package is assembled and presented to Council. And there's a fair amount of work involved in that presentation, and a lot of paper has to be put together. Then we enter the public consultation phase and Council deliberation and direction, and ultimately there'll be a bylaw adoption. So the way that looks is that this was just presented to Council last week. Council or staff is now working with Council to schedule some additional departmental review sessions. These will be special open meetings of the Finance and Policy Committee of the Whole, to which the public will be available to attend, and they will be advertised on the website and in the newspapers once we establish some dates. Also, at every Finance and Policy Committee of the Whole meeting and every Council meeting between now and the time the bylaw is finally adopted, there will be time set aside on the agenda for the public to address Council regarding the budget. Our target is to present a bylaw for adoption on January the 11th, and then it would, again, our target is to have that bylaw adopted, so be introduced on January 11th, adopted on January 25th, 2 weeks later. Those aren't hard and fast dates. We can change those dates as necessary, but it's probably important to remember that until a new bylaw is adopted, the previously approved financial plan remains in effect. So until a new bylaw has been adopted by Council, we are guided by the old plan that was approved by Council last May. Ultimately, we will then go back and do some more review in March and April when we have some new information, and at that point we'll set some tax rates. And the final bylaw and tax rates bylaw must be adopted by May 2011, and that's set by statute. So on to taxes. The first question people ask about the budget is what's it mean for property tax increases. So the 2011 budget is being presented to Council contains a 3.2% overall property tax increase. Now, that increase is not the same for all property classes because we have been shifting taxes from industrial to the residential class, which I'll explain a little bit more in a couple of slides. The residential property tax increase is 1% higher than the average, and the industrial tax increase is actually a decrease. The budget contains a 5% increase for water rates to pay for the costs of water supply projects over the next the next decade or so, and that's likely to be a 5% increase every year for the foreseeable future. There's also a 1.8% increase in garbage and recycling fees, which are largely related to increases in tipping fees, increased cost for a recycling contract, and a new garbage truck that we have purchased. There are no changes proposed for sewer rates in 2011. Now, the impact on an average home. So this is not really an average home. It's a home of about $350,000. We don't know right now what assessments are going to be for 2011, so we're just using this as a typical property in Nanaimo that many people can relate to. So that's 4.2% increase that I mentioned for residential property taxes translates into a $73.63 increase for this home. A 5% water increase for an average water consumption of about 220 gallons a day over the course of a year is $15 a year. And that garbage increase is about $2 a year. So that's a total increase of $90.73 for the services that are being provided by the City of Nanaimo. Now, we don't know at this time what impact there will be on other taxing agencies like the school and hospital districts, so we can only speak for the city. So how this looks over a 5-year period, if you look at the top blended or the average increase, you can see that it's 3.2% this year. It's 2.1% in 2012, 2.6% in 2013, 2.9% in 2014, and a larger increase of 5.7% in 2015. And I'll explain a little bit about why there's a larger increase in that year later on in the discussion. So without the industrial tax shift that I'm about to talk about, all those rates in the 2011 column would all be 3.2%. So what is this industrial tax shift? Well, Council has a policy to reduce the industrial tax rate to the same level as commercial tax rates. And Council's intention was to introduce this policy over a 4-year period between 2009 and 2012. So we've already completed 2 years of the shift. Now, one of the things that happened in 2010 was the commercial tax rate dropped. So this increased the gap between the commercial and industrial tax rates. So it was going to take longer to achieve our target of getting the commercial tax rate and the industrial tax rate at the same level. Now, there'd be a couple of ways we could accommodate that. We could do that by increasing the amount of the shift each year. That is, would be increasing the residential taxes by more and reducing the industrial taxes by more. Or we could do it over a longer period. And what staff has recommended in this budget is that we extend the industrial tax shift for 1 more year into 2013. So the tax shift would now be completed in 2013. And we'll do this by shifting the same dollar value between the classes as previously planned. So in effect, this is a good news budget item for industrial taxpayers because it means that their industrial tax rates will continue to decrease over an extra year. Now, I always thought that there would be some kind of adjustment in the final year. I was surprised at how much it was going to be. So it's just an extra year in the process. So how does this compare to what Council approved last May? So the top line of the slide shows that in May of 2010, when Council approved a 5-year plan, in 2011 they approved essentially a 4.7% overall tax increase. And in fact, what's being brought in for Council's consideration today is 3.2%. And you can see that in the future years of the plan, they're closer, although it's also quite a bit lower in 2012. So why is this increase less than projected? Well, there's a number of things happened. Well, as staff reviewed the budget, we were able to reduce costs in a few areas. The RCMP contract costs are now being predicted to be much lower than was originally anticipated. We've increased the budget for development fees based on the activity we've seen in 2010 and what we project for 2011. We've cut out some money that we'd put into the budget for higher service levels. So in each of the years, we'd put in 1.5% for higher service levels. And we've funded a few items, which I'll talk about in a second, and this was not funded, so we've cut that from the budget. So should Council desire to add anything to the budget at this point, it would require an increase in taxation or some other source of revenue. And as a result of the review that I talked about earlier with staff, we've either cancelled or deferred projects amounting to about $582,000. Now, working against that, there was an increase in the subsidy to the Vancouver Island Conference Centre of $137,000. And by the way, for anybody who's looking at this for the first time and doesn't know what K means, that's accounting shortcut for thousands. That's 436,000. If you see an M, that means million. And I've used that throughout here just to make the slides a little smaller. So on the last slide, I mean, there's hundreds of changes both up and down, but those were some of the major factors that caused the increase to be less than what was predicted. So then if we could introduce it by that much, why is there any increase at all? Well, Council has already approved 5 additional RCMP general duty members and 2 police staff, support staff. That amounts to about $846,000. We have a major project to upgrade and widen the Quarterway Bridge in Bowen Road, which requires some funding from taxation, up to $1.3 million in 2011. And the first full year of, well, we started the full staffing at Fire Station number 4 on Cranberry Avenue in 2010, but the full effect of that will still be felt in 2011. Now, without these 3 items, the property tax increase in 2011 would have been about 0. So essentially, it would have been a status quo budget without these specific items. So Council, in August of 2010, Council approved 8 budget priorities. Now, about a year earlier, they provided some direction on 11 budget priorities. These were condensed into 8. And this next section summarizes how the budget is being presented supports these priorities. So one of the priorities was to maintain a high standard of protective services. And as I've just mentioned, Council has approved 24 additional RCMP officers and 10 municipal support staff over a 5-year period from 2010 to 2014. There's 24/7 staffing at Fire Station number 4 on Cranberry Avenue. And there also will be a new fire station in the budget scheduled to open in 2015 with full-time staffing phased in over 3 years. Another objective was to maintain civic infrastructure at current levels. Now, the maintenance of infrastructure is an issue that's facing all municipalities, and Council has recently received a report from Public Works on this issue. So we believe that in the short term, there's adequate funding in the budget for current operation and maintenance, but that may not be true of the long haul. So asset management plans are being developed for infrastructure, and Engineering and Public Works has already presented some information to Council on the issue. We need now to develop some plans for city facilities and parks, recreation, and culture to flesh out the entire picture. It's quite likely that at some point in the future, staff will be recommending tax increases to cover this infrastructure gap. What we're learning from doing these asset management plans is that we're not raising money fast enough to replace existing facilities. That doesn't account for new facilities, that's only replacement of existing facilities and assets. And other municipalities have already started down this road of having an additional tax levy. Now, we're not planning on presenting that this year, but I would think in a couple of years, Council may be looking at some kind of increase specific for infrastructure. Another objective is to improve water supply systems to ensure adequate supply of high-quality drinking water. And over the next decade, expenditures will increase substantially for water supply. It'll become one of our largest expenditures. This includes a $67 million water treatment plant, increased storage at Jump Creek Dam, and improvements to the number 1 reservoir. And this will be funded through borrowing, grants, reserves, development cost charges, and increased water rates. So we're going to be needing to do access all the sources of funding that we can find. Another objective is to work with employee groups to continuously improve city services. And we just wanted to mention that staff are committed to ensuring continuous service and value improvements. And this is reflected in staff's strategic priorities for the coming years. Staff are currently researching and developing key performance indicators to measure effectiveness of city services. Another priority is the transition to more sustainable operations, including a focus on energy and productivity efficiencies and energy production where opportunities exist. So we already have on staff an energy manager, which is partially funded through BC Hydro. In conjunction with this energy manager and the various departments, we are going to implement energy and greenhouse gas reduction projects of about $305,000 in 2011, about $1 million over the 5-year plan. So our objective with this funding is to try and save the city some money by reducing energy costs and to save the environment through reduced greenhouse gas emissions. There's also a community energy and emissions study to identify some citywide energy use and the future demand related to land use, building types, and transportation. Responsible growth management is another objective, and that's supported by continued implementation of the official community plan. The budget contains 1 new neighborhood plan annually. It's an objective to partner with the province and non-profit associations to reduce homelessness in Nanaimo. Now, this involves, from a financial point of view, $165,000 annual contribution to the Housing Legacy Reserve. Now, this reserve is used to provide funding for land acquisition and housing project capital and development costs. And this can span a continuum of housing from emergency shelters to market affordable housing, so it's not just one type of housing. And finally, to support the Economic Development Commission in developing and implementing an updated economic development strategy. Now, this commission will advise Council on several items, including the economic development objectives, new economic development opportunities, economic sustainability and visioning, and establishing and tracking economic development benchmarks and key issues related to economic development. And there are 3 council members who are sitting on the Economic Development Commission. So some budget highlights. So within the budget over the next 5 years, we have quite an ambitious capital plan. Now, that capital plan includes a new fire station on Hammond Bay Road at a cost of about $2.7 million, and that will be constructed between 2013 to 2014 and would be operational presumably in 2015. And that's $2.7 million, which will need to be funded from borrowing. The police building expansion is scheduled for 2012 for completion in 2013. That's $8.5 million, also scheduled to be funded through borrowing. Now, both of those projects where borrowing is involved will require approval of the electors, so that will have to be done either through some form of alternate approval process, the counter-petition process, or through a referendum. The last fire station that we built on Cranberry Avenue we did an alternate approval process, and there was, if I remember correctly, only 2 people who petitioned against. There's a project at Harewood Centennial Park, which is a youth park project, and that's funded largely through private contributions. That's scheduled for 2011 to 13. And as you can see, most of these are major projects that span more than 1 year in the city's budget. Maffeo Sutton Park, $2.7 million from 2012 to 2015, with the first phase of that being an upgraded amenities building, so new washrooms. The Merle Logan Sports Field is an additional second artificial turf for Merle Logan Field, $1.8 million. And the Bowen Corridor Bridge project I already talked about. The total project over the next couple of years is $8.5 million. Now, the large project for 2015 is Chase River Spillway, and that is about $2 million to be funded from taxation. It's a major impact on 2015 taxes. We need to do more work on exactly defining what that project is, and that could change the scope of the project. So it's still a few years off. A major project in 2011, which I believe will probably carry over to 2012, is the Solaris subdivision upgrade. That's a major project that does water, sewer, and also storm drains funding out of the general fund. So the major project that's included in the budget is the water treatment plant, and there's $58.8 million for the plant itself included in the 5-year plan. The total cost of the project exceeds $67 million, including the funding for the reservoir, and there'll be some discussion of that on the next presentation. The project is funded from grants, almost $28 million from grant revenue, development cost charges of $8.4 million, some reserves of $1.1 million, some water fees of $2.9 million, and borrowing of $18.5 million. The borrowing will require elector assent, and that will probably be sought in 2011. The plant is scheduled to be operational in 2015 with an annual operating cost of about $2.1 million. Now, the final costs are to be determined after completion of detailed design, which is ongoing. And I mentioned there were a lot of water supply projects, some of the other ones. So there's the reservoir number 1, which will be the subject of the next presentation. There's the South Fork Dam, so studies and land acquisition for a new dam for additional water supply. A water main rehabilitation in the Wakeside of Waddington area, so projected to be $2.4 million in 2013. And that's to upgrade existing 1954 steel water main. Groundwater alternative supply, so that's an emergency water connection that staff are pursuing, and that would be scheduled for 2014 to 2015. This would build the infrastructure necessary to get this emergency supply. And there's a duplicate main for 2015 scheduled for $5 million, and this is from the number 1 reservoir through the College Park area. This is one of the main water area mains in the city that we want a duplicate main for redundancy reasons. So I talked about higher service levels. So essentially what that is that staff are directed to present the budget based on the assumption that they will only do what was done in 2010, that we cannot introduce new services without Council's approval. So that isn't to say we always just continue to do the same thing over again. As I said earlier, we do review the budget, we do provide some changes, but we also, if a new service is to be requested, it needs to go through council. So there were about $1 million in higher service level requests made by staff members, and that's included in council's budget package, and the information of that's available on the website if anybody wants any detail. It includes about 8 full-time equivalent staff. The only one that's being recommended by the city manager is a water supply technologist, which is funded from the water user fee, so it has no direct impact on taxation. And this person would be used to support the design and planning for the water treatment plant. Things that were not recommended include 3 RCMP members, so 2 bike unit and 1 plainclothes, a civilian police services electronic file manager, a civilian local area network support person at police services, some study work to review of subsurface conditions on Terminal Avenue corridor, property management strategy for the city's property inventory, funding for Pacific Sport, an additional engineering technician in the infrastructure planning area, and a manager's, restoring a manager's position at Public Works. So these positions were included, but they're not being supported by the city manager at this time. If council wished to include these or add any of their own, as I said earlier, there would be an impact on taxation. Speaking of taxation, so the next issue is to talk a little bit about how taxes work. So for anybody who hasn't heard me talk about this before, this is the simple formula that determines how your property taxes get set. And there's 2 sides to this formula. There's assessment and tax rate. So the assessment is determined by BC Assessment. The city has no influence over that. BC Assessment is a separate provincial crown corporation, independent. They will be conducting their assessment, and they'll be sending out assessment notices somewhere around the end of the year. And for anybody who's listening, you have about a month after you receive your property tax notice, your assessment notice, till the end of January to appeal your assessment if you disagree with the value in your assessment. The tax rate, the other half of the formula, is set by a number of taxing authorities. And I'll give you a list of those in just a minute, but they're not just the city. So from the assessment perspective, there are 9 classes of assessment in the city of Nanaimo. Actually, there's only 9 in the entire province of British Columbia, so every property falls into one of these 9. And the reason that 3 of them are a different color is because those 3 assessment classes make up the majority of the assessment in BC, and in Nanaimo, and you'll see some slides later to support that. So residential assessment includes all property that's used for residential purposes, whether it's single-family, multifamily, duplex, even if it's vacant land that's intended for residential use, it'll be assessed as residential. Major industry are the mills and other major properties in town, and business and other is the bulk of businesses and commercial enterprises in the city. Now, as for the other side of the equation, who sets the taxes? Well, the city obviously is one of the taxing authorities, and we're the largest of the group. But our taxes are also set by the school district, actually by the province on behalf of the school district. The regional district of Nanaimo presents the city with a requisition, as does the regional hospital and the Vancouver Island Regional Library, and we set tax rates for all of those groups. And Municipal Finance Authority and BC Assessment. So the city acts as a tax collector for all those other agencies. So just some quick history. In 2010, there was a 2% overall tax increase. In 2009, it was 3.1. In 2008, it was 3.6. Anybody who's really interested, this presentation will be presented on the website, so this information will be available to the public. On a graph, more graphically, it shows that over a 10-year period, tax rate increases on average have been anywhere between 1.4 and 6.5%. So somewhere in the 3% is relatively normal for us over the past 10 years. And how can this help you estimate your property taxes? Well, it doesn't really. It's difficult to do at this stage, partly because we don't have any information from the other taxing agencies, and we don't have any information about how your assessment may have changed since last year. So once the property tax once the budget is approved in January and assessment notices are out, so the city website will have a property tax estimator working, and that will people will be able to log on and use that to try and get an estimate of what their property taxes will be in 2011. Now, to start with, it'll include a lot of assumptions, but we'll update it as soon as new information is available. So how do we compare to other municipalities? Well, the province of BC maintains statistics, and they do it based on what they call a representative house. And they obtain this representative house simply by determining what the average assessment is for a single-family property in each municipality. So in BC, there are 27 municipalities that have a population between 25,000 and 200,000, and I've chosen those as a representative group to compare ourselves to. And you can see that, for example, in Kelowna, it has an average assessment of $454,000 for a single-family home. They pay $2,801 total variable rate taxes. So that's the amount they pay on their property tax bill to all taxing authorities. The difference between that and the total column is how much they pay on a separate bill for utilities like water, sewer, and garbage. So the total column represents the total cost of municipal government in that municipality. So it includes your property tax bill, water, sewer, and garbage rates. And what this tells us is that Kelowna, for example, was the 19th highest, so 1 being the highest and 27 being the lowest. Kelowna was near the bottom of the pack in terms of how they rank compared to these other 27 municipalities. Now, Nanaimo, using the same criteria as 21st, these 4 municipalities other than Nanaimo were chosen because they're all similar in size to Nanaimo and similar in composition. They're all regional centers, and they're not. Most of the other municipalities are located either in the Metro Vancouver area or in the Capital Regional Districts. They have a little bit of a different composition. So on commercial tax rates, we don't compare quite so favorably. So here's a number of municipalities similar in size, again, that we would compare ourselves to. And I've included the rate in 2009, so you can see that in, I think, 4 of the 6, the tax rate for commercial went down. Now, Nanaimo at $13.92 per thousand of assessment is still higher than the average of other BC cities. On industrial tax rates, I've compared us to other municipalities that had mills that were comparable to Nanaimo, so similar kinds of assessment, and you can see that we have, relatively speaking, lower tax rates than those other municipalities. This is largely due to Council's policy to reduce industrial taxation over time. Now, in 2010, Nanaimo was at 80% of the average of cities and 94% of the average of all municipalities. So when I say cities, I mean city municipalities as opposed to villages, towns, districts, others that may not be quite so comparable. The 94% of all municipalities includes, obviously, all municipalities. So what that means is at 100% we'd be the average. So we are less than average in both of those comparators. So on assessments, the purpose of this graph is to show you that assessments come from a number of different classifications. So the bottom of these bars in each case is residential assessment. There's a very thin dark blue line that you can't even really pick out on these charts very well, and that's major industrial assessment. And the top part of the bar is the commercial assessment. So you can see, for example, in Victoria and Kelowna, you barely see any sort of major industry. Now, how that translates into actual tax levies is quite interesting. So what this tells you is that for the same classifications, first of all, you can see that the major industry bar has suddenly become more visible. So obviously, a couple of these municipalities, particularly Prince George, are getting a fair amount of taxation from their major industry. Victoria, for example, is now the largest. They actually collect more taxes than Kelowna, even though comparatively speaking, you can see that their assessment base is lower. And that's because they have a very large commercial base. So what this translates to when you're talking about this in terms of a single municipality, so for Nanaimo, for example, out of about 85% of our assessment base is residential, and from that we collect about 65.5% of our property taxes. For major industry, it's less than 1% is the assessment is residential, but 2.6% is the amount of property taxes we collect, and obviously, or also business and light industry. So the commercial classifications we collect about double in terms of their assessment compared to taxes compared to their assessment. So who are the major taxpayers in Nanaimo? Well, basically, they're mills and malls. So Woodgrove Mall is taxes for all agencies. So this includes school, hospital, regional district, as well as the city. So Woodgrove Mall in 2010 was the largest taxpayer, with Nanaimo Forest Products being second largest. And for years, I've given this presentation or versions of it many times, and for years Harmac was the largest taxpayer, or they were tied, and now as a result of the industrial tax shift, they've gone down. Also, in addition to the city's industrial tax shift, the province has provided a rebate of 50% of school taxes to industrial classifications. So that's also reduced their tax levies considerably. So First Capital Corporation owns a number of malls and commercial enterprises in Nanaimo. BC Ferries is the one exception. Since they ceased to be a Crown corporation and became a private enterprise, they now pay property taxes. And Country Club and North Nanaimo Town Centre also are malls in town. So the statistic I find fascinating is that the top 30 taxpayers in Nanaimo, which is 0.09% of taxpayers, paid $22 million, or 1/6 of all property taxes. So showing those slides earlier, one of the things it illustrated was the difference in what many people refer to as ratios. So a ratio basically is the ratio between commercial and residential taxes, or light industry and residential taxes. So when it says 3.2 in 1995 for commercial, that means in that year, the commercial tax rate was 3.2 times the residential tax rate. So you can see that the trend over time is basically for the commercial and major industry tax ratios to have reduced over the last 10-year period. When we talk about assessment and taxation, one of the things that people say is, well, if you've got all this increased assessment, why don't you have more money to play with? And the answer to that is that we only get the city only receives additional revenue when there's new assessment, so not when there's general increases in market values. So new assessment comes from an increase in what BC assessment refers to as inventory. So a new value is created either through a subdivision or constructing a new building. General increases in market value do not generate more tax dollars, but they might result in them being distributed differently. So what we have in the budget for new growth in 2011 is $1.2 million, and we've got that in the budget for each of the upcoming 5 years. Now, we actually got more than that in 2010, and we will be reviewing this number as we get more information about the building statistics and information from BC Assessment. So this is one of the numbers that's likely to change before the final budget is adopted. As I said, we'll talk a little bit about revenues and surpluses to try and explain why, if we have $92 million, we just don't have that to spend on anything we want. A surplus, so first of all, what is a surplus? In municipal government, a surplus is an amount by which revenues exceed expenditures in a year. And the city budget does not contain any budget for a surplus. We budget for a balanced budget. We budget based on the assumption that our revenues will be equal to our expenditures, and that's a requirement of the community charter. So if we do that, why do we actually have a surplus? Well, some years we get unexpected revenue, so maybe the province might give us a grant we weren't predicting. That hasn't happened recently, but it has happened in the past. In some years, we get a revenue that exceeds the budget. So if some revenues are difficult to forecast, like investment and fees, and in past years, we have sometimes been conservative in estimating our budgets for those, so we end up with a surplus, and that is probably not going to happen in 2010 as well. We do have expenditures under the budget, so that's one of the reasons for a surplus, and we have that for a couple of reasons. And one of those is because the budget tends to be conservative, because we know that we can't budget for a deficit, so we don't want it to be caught short at the end of the year. Another reason is because we budget for 100% of vacant positions. So 100% of all staffing positions. So if a position becomes vacant during the year and it isn't filled right away, so if it's vacant for a month or 2 or 3 months, that ends up becoming part of our surplus. We don't have a surplus in our capital budget because we tend to either we complete the project in a future year to carry that project over and complete it in a future year, or to transfer it to a similar type of project to complete that. So we do get surpluses. What do we do with them? Well, generally speaking, they go into reserves. They go into property purchases reserve, for example, a general capital reserve. We've used them to build up an uninsured claims reserve and an uncollected taxes reserve to help protect us against unforeseen circumstances. They are sometimes used for property tax reduction, and they can be used to fund some employment-related liabilities that weren't budgeted for. So we are predicting at the end of 2010 we'll have about $92 million in reserves. If I remember right, we started the year with about $89 million in reserves, so it's relatively similar in level. We have a number of various categories. One category of reserves we have are development cost charges. And funds in those reserves can only be used to fund approved development cost charge projects. So those projects must have been, for the most part, included in a bylaw at the time we set the development cost charges. We have a number of statutory reserves which are established either by statute, by the provincial law, or by the city's bylaws. So once again, those reserves are specified for a single purpose. We have quite a large amount of water and sewer reserves which can only be used for water and sewer purposes. So that leaves us with the reserve accounts, which is sort of the general allocations of surplus that I was referring to earlier. here's a list of some of the major ones, and most of them have been allocated for a specific purpose. As I pointed out, the Housing Legacy Reserve, we've got some commitments to. The the uncollected tax reserve is there in case we have a major default and we aren't able to reclaim the taxation through the tax sale process. So we have a number of reserves now. These reserves, the balances fluctuate from one year to the next because we also actually put money into reserves every year. So it's a bit like money flows in and money flows out. It's not a stagnant situation. Now, some of the specific projects we've used reserves for over the past decade or so is the purchase of Neck Point Park, to fund the construction of the Aquatic Centre, purchase of Lindley Valley, construction of Oliver Woods Community Centre was partially funded through reserves, as was the Harbourfront Parkade, and when we did the leisure refit on Bibbin Pool. The Port of Nanaimo Centre, this building was largely funded from City of Nanaimo reserves, and we do many and many water and sewer projects from reserves. Last topic I'll cover quickly is debt servicing and financing. So the debt servicing, the debt cost per capita. So this is the average amount of debt the city has for every person within the city, every citizen. So in 1996, it was about $604 per capita. It dropped through the late 90s and early 2000s because largely we borrowed a lot of money in the late 70s up to about 1980 as a result of amalgamation. That money was used to do a lot of infrastructure works in the city. As that debt dropped off in the late 90s and up until about 2005, the amount of debt per capita decreased. It also decreased, of course, because we were increasing the number of people, so there was more people to spread the debt over. Now there's a bit of it levels off in 2000. That was the year we borrowed to build the Aquatic Centre. And it goes back up again in 2006 and 2007, and that's because we borrowed $15 million in each of those years to help fund the construction of the Port of Nanaimo Centre. Now, we've done some predictions, and we think that as a result of the number of the projects that we're borrowing for that I mentioned earlier, the new fire station, the new police station, the police station upgrade, and some of the water projects, that we'd be up to about $600 per capita by the end of 2015, so the end of this budget planning horizon. As a percentage of expenditures, it's a similar story. You can see that it steps down over time and down to started at 8.8% in the mid-90s, down to 2.7% as a percentage of expenditures. This is all expenditures, including operating and capital. And we're predicting it'll increase to about 4% by the end of 2015. So just to see how this compares to other municipalities, again, these are a number of similar-sized municipalities that we've compared to. You can see by looking at this that some municipalities have made some quite different choices about how they're going to fund their infrastructure. Some places like Prince George, for example, have chosen to do a lot of borrowing and to fund their infrastructure costs through debt. Others like Chilliwack and Langley District have used different models to get infrastructure built. The average for this group of municipalities is $633 per capita. Nanaimo's in 2009 was lower than that average. And that's the presentation, Your Worship. So
Thank you.
All this
if you go
information.
back, sorry, on the last slide, if you went back, I think there was a kind of a transposition thing. I think the average is $823.97.
You're right, sorry.
And Victoria, yeah, $633.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, the average was $823, and I was looking at Victoria's number when I spoke there. So all the information that I'm giving you tonight is available on the city's website, as are full budgets and financial reports. There is a budget forum, so there's a place for people to ask questions and get their budget questions answered. Or you can phone the city number and say you have a budget question, and either Shannon Grain or I will answer your question. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Ms. Clements. Very good. Are there any questions from council? Sorry, Councillor Patchy.
Thank you, Worship. Thank you, Mr. Clements, very much for that. Just two questions at this point. There's many more, but I'll contain myself. When we attended a seminar given by Mr. Hickey, our Director of Public Works, we were told that we were in a rather serious deficit with regards to replacing aging infrastructure. There's nothing in this budget that would even begin to remedy that. When should we start with that? Your Worship, maybe I'll tackle that one. That is there's a bit of an interpretation difference. The Director of Finance indicated that he agreed there was a looming asset management or asset maintenance deficit. I think our view is that at the current time it's manageable, but we do need to be thinking ahead. And in the near future, we're going to be likely recommending setting aside tax monies to address that. We think at this point that a logical time to commence that might be once the tax shift from major industry is completed. So that's something that we'll probably be recommending in a few years.
Thank you. And a follow-up, if I may, Your Worship, and that has to do with fire and rescue, and I see Chief Lambert is here. When we talk about 24/7 staffing of the Chase River Station and the eventually coming of the station at Hammond Bay, I still have the idea, or I'm under the impression, that we have equipment that goes out on fire calls where we have trucks that are only manned by 3 persons instead of 4. In order to make it safe and to let them work to their fullest potential, there should be 4. Could you or Mr. Clements give us an indication as to what kind of money is involved in order to achieve that? Thank you.
Your Worship, Councillor Paggi is correct. There are a limited number of call-outs that do occur with less than the 4-person crew, in fact only 3, and that is, as you say, a less desirable situation. And I know that the fire chief, I don't know if you're here, Ron, the fire chief, I believe, has done some calculations of what that would cost, and I'll ask the fire chief to speak to it directly.
You're on.
We've done some calculations. Right now, we're running in the area of 4-member crews, somewhere around the low 90th percentile. If we were to staff up on overtime, we would look at probably in the area of approximately $50,000 within that region.
In the scheme of things, that doesn't seem too much money to have go towards the ultimate that we should have, which is the safety of everyone concerned. Fire crews, as well as people who could be in buildings that are on fire, and because of the shortage, firemen might not be able to go in. It's not on the list for higher service request, is it?
It's not currently, Your Worship. That's something that staff are discussing internally about whether or not we'd make a recommendation on that, and if so, when. And it's certainly something that we'd be obviously prepared to take your direction from. We think an appropriate process would be for us to bring forward a recommendation on that in the future.
Councillor Sherry.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Clement says earlier in your presentation you had made mention of housing. Now, this is for housing for the homeless. It's not housing for the low, or what we call it, the low barrier housing.
I believe, Your Worship, I believe that can cover any number of issues, including both those.
Your Worship, and in fact, you probably recall that the city has provided assistance in development costs for facilities like Kiwanis House, and so it covers a full range of non-market housing, all the way from homeless shelters to accommodation for people that have financial stresses that are more challenging than normal. So,
in other words, what we are doing, and what the topic of the day is, Cordaway Hospital, which we classify as low barrier, and this, my understanding was this was funding from the province for that, and this additional thing, are we also including additional funds into the low barrier housing in this budget and next budget?
The agreement between the city and the province is that the city will provide the land, and in fact, for the property by the hospital, the city already owns the land, so there's no new cost for that. But the city's also agreed to fund development-related costs like development cost charges. So the funds that are in this budget will be used to pay the development cost charges, for example, of that facility.
But that seems to be a small amount of the total cost.
Of the total amount in the fund?
The total amount of costs that the provincial government is supposed to be coming forward to supply this project within the community.
Oh, exactly. The city taxpayer share is a very small fraction of the total. The most of the money is coming from the province.
Okay, and it's just that I think it should be clarified exactly when we say homelessness, that we also include development cost charges as it relates to the low barrier. But it's not, my understanding, it's not to go out and purchase more land for that project.
Not for that project. However, if the city wasn't fortunate enough to have land, you may choose to use this fund to acquire land for another project once these projects are complete, should something else come up as a community need. So it is a fund that is available for council to use as you see fit.
Okay, the other comment that I have, and I think that we should identify for the general public when we talk about the Chase River Spillway. My understanding, the Chase River Spillway relates to the property commonly known as the Collery Dam Park. Is that correct?
Not exactly. It's in that vicinity, and I'll have Mr. Hickey respond. It's actually a little bit to the west of the Collery Dam Park, on the other side of the road there.
Mayor Rattan, that is correct. Councillor Sherry, the spillway is just on the other side of the road from our number 1 reservoir.
So,
well, you'll be talking a little later on in your presentation as it relates to where the site is for the number 1 deal. And the question that we had when we had the seminars, the terminology, because it takes a long bit from the Chase River, and it was classed in those presentations as part of the Chase River Spillway. So I think it's that we all are on the same page and have the same idea of where this facility is going.
Mrs. Swaby, did you have something you wanted to add? No? Councillor Beswick.
Thank you. Like my counterpart, Councillor Patchy, just one question that I have to staff as I look forward to the recommendation coming forward as it relates to the 4-person crew. Is or will a motion be required to bring that recommendation forward?
Your Worship, if Council wanted to provide direction, that of course is always appropriate, but failing that, as I indicated, staff do intend to review this issue internally and make a recommendation to you in the near future.
If I may, if a motion is presented in the near future, would that be for the 2011 budget deliberations?
Council could specify that. My preference would be to come forward with a report, because I think that it's an issue that requires Council to consider some of the pros and cons and some of the related issues as part of the decision-making process. So my recommendation would be to ask us for a report rather than to provide direction.
Thank you. And just a couple of questions to Mr. Clements. The $2.7 million for the Hammond Bay Fire Department does or does not include the $300,000 design?
That includes the $300,000 design costs.
Thank you. And I think it's also important for the viewers to be aware that earlier in your presentation, you noted 3 items that could conceivably make the 2011 budget a 0 increase. And I believe that those added to approximately $2.4 million, fire, police, and another. I think it's important that people understand that any items, including these or any one of these plus others, totaling $2.4 million, would present a zero budget. Is that fair to say? A zero budget increase?
Yeah, Your Worship, that's absolutely correct. The only difference being that these are services or levels that weren't provided in 2010, so they're increases.
So they don't necessarily have to be services that weren't provided in 2010. Just it can be any amount of money to that amount.
That's correct. These are only identified because they're a higher service level from last year.
Thank you. And finally, the 30% that you notice of taxes that are collected, as you noted, mills and malls, one was a mill, and 30%. And what is our total budget? They're making reference to that 30%.
Oh, our total tax levy is about $80 million.
So this 30% then is $25 million estimate?
Your Worship, my recollection was 16%.
16%. Sorry, I missed the percentage. Yes, that's correct. The total is about 16% of taxes.
And this is small business we're making reference to?
Well, yes, the city gets paid by the mall owner, but obviously individual stores within the malls would be paying those taxes through to the malls on their triple net leases.
So the stores and the small businesses and the people that own and operate the small businesses who are in turn paying rent, which covers off taxes, are contributing a considerable amount of our annual tax levy.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Okay, just one question I had, Mr. Clements, before we have 2 or 3 other questions too. You mentioned about shifting the industrial tax rate and adding an additional year on it, and I'm just wondering, did any of the graphs that you presented reflect that, or would they be changed with that extension for the further year?
Most of the graphs that I presented were based on the average change in taxes, so that it would be the general increase, not the industrial increase or the residential increase, so that they would not be reflected in the graphs that I've had.
Okay, thank you. We have Councillor Johnstone. Just before you start, sorry, is there anyone else on staff that has a comment? I've got a queue on here for staff, but if there's nobody who wants to speak to it, we'll go on to Councillor Johnstone.
Thank you, Your Worship. Mr. Clements, how do you estimate new revenue from growth over the next 5 years? You've projected new revenue from growth, and I'm sure I'm interested, and the viewers may be interested in how you arrive at those numbers.
Your Worship, you threw to Councillor Johnstone. That's a really good question. We do it in a couple of different ways. One is by looking at previous years and gauging our building permits against, for current year, against what we got in previous years. We go and we look at major projects that have been completed during the year. So obviously when a new major commercial development gets built, that has a larger impact on our taxation. But our best estimate comes from BC Assessment because they will provide us around the end of the year with some better information using their assessment data, which is essentially what we use to set taxes on anyhow. But until we get their tax roll at the end of the year, we're just basing it on our previous experience and our sort of a general feeling for how the construction activity has been during the year.
Thank you.
Councillor Holden.
Okay, thank you, Your Worship. Just following up on questions from Councillors Bestwick and Johnson, I just wanted to get this, to put it another way, the growth, is it fair to say that the growth that we've experienced this year is actually paying for the somewhat increasing costs for just ordinary, plain existing services? So in other words, if the increases, for instance, to the RCMP, the firefighters, and the Quarterway Bridge are what represent why we would be overall experiencing a 3.2% increase, and if we remove those, it would be zero, then that means, because the costs for the other services are going up at least a bit, that new growth is paying for those. Is that right?
Well, the amount of revenue we got from new growth was about $1.6 million, and the cost of those 3 services was about $2.4 million. So they're in the ballpark.
Okay, I'm saying not looking at those services, but the actual increased cost for existing services because of contracts and wage settlements and cost of materials and power and energy and all of that is going up somewhat. it could only be zero if the new growth is actually paying for it, right?
That's correct, yeah.
Okay. The other specific question I just wanted to ask, I asked it earlier and I got an answer by email, but I think it's worth sharing publicly. In the past, we used to try to hire enough RCMP officers to represent a ratio of 700 people for every individual police officer. No, not caseloads, 700 people in the population for every one RCMP officer. A year ago or so, the RCMP came and made a very good case that because of accelerating paperwork and data collection that they're required to do now to provide better service across the country, frankly, they actually need more officers to do the work on the street. So now, with this and last year's increase in personnel for the RCMP, what is our ratio vis-a-vis the population?
Well, Your Worship, the estimated ratio for 2011, based on the budget and our prediction for the population in 2011, would be 1 to 646. So that's an improvement over the 1 to 700 ratio.
Yes. Any idea what it might be at the end of this program of adding 24 officers?
Well, we're predicting at the end of 2015 it would be about 1 to 627.
Yeah. This is just a comment, but at some point I think we have to ask, because the cost per officer is pretty high, around $120,000 when you include the car and so on, maybe more. Just how far we want to go in changing that ratio. So it's just at some point there, you would wonder whether there are diminishing returns for that.
Okay. Councillor Beswick.
Thank you, Your Worship, and certainly not to get into a debate with Councillor Holdham, but the analogy of the 0% if new growth was paying its way, there's other ways in which for the budget to be at 0%. And those are other items that could be, it's holding the line, it is identifying other items that total that amount or somewhere nearer that amount that may not be reflected in the fire police or the Quarterway Bridge project. So there are other ways beyond just new growth paying for the 1.8% or whatever that number is of increased cost to the city. And that's called what we all know is that's being prudent in our determinations of what items that we choose. And my last comment is when we compare to Kamloops and Prince George and Kelowna's on the numbers of $425,000 houses versus $300,000 houses and the couple $100 in difference that they pay in taxes, we can take it a step further and go on what services that those communities are being provided in the recreation facilities and the infrastructure that they have for what they're paying for. And I think that, so the numbers are the numbers. What you receive within inside the community for what you're paying, I think is an item that we don't necessarily see on there that's a subjective one. And I think if we had an opportunity to do some internalizing with what we receive for what we pay for, might be another interesting slide to present. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Kipp.
Thank you, Worship. I'm just going to plug in on this. I don't know if new growth is the cause of, say, the upswing in police and fire, or are we behind previously and we're playing catch up, and that wasn't a priority before. So our priority has shifted now to public safety with this terrorized world we lived in since 2001. So those priorities have come forward, and before maybe they were neglected or not as highly valued. So I'll talk to that at a different time. This is still an incremental budget that doesn't really change. It's very stable. It doesn't have, it assumes all activities and methods of working will continue. It doesn't really give incentives to reduce costs because people work from a starting budget. That's why I'm focused on that zero-based budgeting and trying to get back to zero to complete what Councillor Bestwick said, is to get down to what we're really spending our money on. And like I say, there's advantages to incremental budgeting, but there's a lot of disadvantages, and I know I've sent that forward. And I really encourage us to get down and deep and dirty on this next year to really look at what 2012 is at a zero sum. Start with zero. Thank you.
Okay, I see no further questions, so we'll move along into the next presentation. And okay, seconder, all in favor? Opposed? Carried. Mr. Sims, we have Mr. Bill Sims, Manager of Water Resources, and Mr. T.M. Hickey, the Director of Engineering and Public Works, and representatives from the Associated Engineering to provide a presentation regarding number 1 reservoir siting and the hydro generation. Gentlemen.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'd like to mention that there's 2 reports on your agenda this evening, both of which are addressed here. And we welcome Sean Balangaro from Associated Engineering, who's the consultant for the South Fork Water Treatment Plant. And he's going to be talking about the location of the proposed number 1 reservoir, which is one of the subject of one of the reports. And there's a short few slides towards the end of his presentation which will address power generation opportunities here at number 1 reservoir. Thank you.
Okay.
Sean.
Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Bill, and thank you, Your Worship. As Bill said, this presentation is to do with the reservoir siting, reservoir number 1. This is closely linked to the water treatment plant. It's just going to review some of the key issues. The existing facility is an open reservoir. It's concrete lined, about 60 megalitres, that's million litres, and it contains untreated water. There's a chlorination facility on site, and it provides basically the core air of the city with water, what's often referred to as the 107 zone. So why do we need to replace it? Well, once the new treatment plant is built, obviously we're going to have high quality treated water. That's going to be fed down into the reservoir. An open reservoir is basically a contamination risk. Mammals or bird life can get in it and contaminate the water. So it will undo all the work that we do at the water treatment plant. The contamination risk is significant. The city has worked hard to try and control that, keeping birds out of the reservoir, but it is an ongoing risk. The existing reservoir needs to be decommissioned and replaced with an enclosed treated water reservoir, and that's the standard within the water industry. The new capacity would be typically 14 million litres. That's the actual need. The previous volume of 60 million litres was very much the basis of what the topography would hold. 14 million litres is what the real requirement is. Trying to put a roof on the reservoir is just not feasible. It's an irregular shape, as you can see. Costs would be significant, and the construction logistics would be quite challenging. And perhaps the major challenge is the continuous operation. When we build a new reservoir, we put the new service in. We want to be able to maintain service to all the customers of the city while the new facility is built. So we were looking at options. A number of options came up. On that figure you'll see there's 3 circles shown for the proposed reservoir in the existing reservoir. The challenge there, of course, was keeping a reservoir in service while we constructed a new. The other sites that you see around the reservoir, there's one to the west, one to the east, and one to the southwest and to the south. These areas are actually at a higher ground, and that presents challenge in terms of matching the right hydraulics within the city, and there'd be a significant construction cost to make those work. So we ended up looking at a new site off to the north there, just to the east of the highway, just on the edge of a piece of existing parkland. At this site, there'd be a reduced cost. I guess that's the key feature. Easy to make an uninterrupted service as we put the new reservoir in. There's a limited community impact and environmental impact. We're right next to the roadway. It is in the park, but it's on the part of the park which is not as treed, and it's not part of the main pathways through the park. And ease of construction is another key consideration. This is right next to a good access road, plenty of space for construction. To give you an idea of what we're looking at here, this is one of the existing reservoirs in the city. It's a little bit smaller than the one we're going to be looking at. This is perhaps the new reservoir will be perhaps 30% bigger than this one. And this is the proposed site.
And Mayor Tan and Council, to follow up on what Sean has presented for a siting location, that facility we're locating in the park area, but to make up for the loss of park space, Council may explore opportunities to use some of the city property that is adjacent to the number 1 reservoir, and that would be on the side of the parkway to the left of what is in the diagram on the screen right now, and that is provided as the second recommendation in the report.
Thank you.
As Bill mentioned, we just wanted to follow up with a few slides on the energy generation potential. The city and I think Council has recognised for some time that there's opportunities within the water system to recover hydraulic energy. It's basically low-impact hydropower. Perhaps the best opportunity within the whole of the watershed is at reservoir number 1. The water enters the site at a fairly high pressure, and that pressure has to be knocked down. Anybody who's familiar with the site will know that there's a kind of 2 rooster tails that jet out over the reservoir. Well, that's basically is energy dissipation. There's an opportunity to capture that energy. We've looked at a fairly simple design. It's basically including pumps as turbines. It's fairly low-tech but very reliable technology to recover energy. We're looking at just shy of 1 gigawatt hour per annum on the electrical energy, and roughly that's enough to supply approximately 100 homes. The capital cost, this is a cost within the budget for the reservoir number 1, reservoir number 1 construction of $671,000, and the annual revenue is just shy of the $200,000. So that gives us a payback, just a little bit, a simple payback, just over 3.5 years, and a very good rate of return, or a very attractive rate of return, I should say. At 20%, that certainly is worth noting. Typically, a private developer looking at a project would consider something like 10% and above a pretty good project. And as I mentioned, the financing for this project is included in the budget for the reservoir number 1, and the concept is based on working in with reservoir number 1. So therefore, the timing of the project is also consistent, so that 2012, 2013 timeframe. That's all I had, Your Worship.
Okay, just before you go, Councillor Sherry, did you have a question?
Well, through you, Mr. Chairman, where the proposed reservoir number 1 is being planned to be constructed, then we're going to not dismantle but decommission the current reservoir that we have currently using?
Mayor Rattan, that is correct, yes.
Okay. Well, when it was under the Greater Nanaimo Water District, okay, the Greater Nanaimo Water District had a considerable amount of land that went up towards the, I'll call it the hydro transmission lines, over to what I still call as 7th Street, and down the hill to where the old railway grade is at the Calgary Dam Park. We still own that? Does the Greater Nanaimo Water District still own that?
Mayor Rattan, technically the city owns that. The water district was disbanded a few years ago and the properties transferred to city title. Okay, because then for if you're going to use an acre or 2 acres at the most for that number 1 reservoir on the Harewood Road side, then what would need to happen in order to turn the remnant Greater Nanaimo Water District property that I just described over to the Parks and Recreation to be utilized by the whole community? Mayor Rattan, we believe that potentially the Parks, Rec and Culture Commission could explore ideas or opportunities for that area, the reservoir, or any of those properties that Councillor Sherry's referring to. So that's an excellent idea and something that requires some follow-up as to determine what potential park uses might be liked or responded to by the community.
Because, as I say, there's trailways within what I call the number 2 dam area up on the bluff there that were utilized by the community a long time ago, and I don't even know they're still in existence or not, but they should be explored because there's some terrific trailways within that terrain.
Mayor Rattan, yes, good points.
Okay, I have Councillor Patchy.
Thank you, Worship. If I may ask a question of Mr. Sims. This new circular concrete reservoir that's proposed holds 14 million litres. What is Nanaimo's average daily use? It doesn't seem like a heck of a lot.
14 million litres?
No,
doesn't seem like an awful lot.
How many days is that of the supply?
That's on a winter's day. That's probably about half a day's supply. So the major function of the reservoir is to sort of buffer really sharp and high peak uses during the day. Like you have a great deal of use early in the morning when everybody gets up for a shower, and another great use later in the evening when everybody comes home and starts to prepare supper. So we're constantly flowing water, but the reservoirs are used to sort of buffer those really peaky times.
What would happen if we had a considerable seismic event, for instance, and this thing was put out of commission?
This particular, the proposed reservoir?
Yeah.
That would be a concern, of course. There's a number of emergency water intakes that have been built over the years, and that's part of the budget that Mr. Clemens referred to a little bit later on, was looking for some more emergency water. But if a major seismic event and we lost the major supply mains, then it would be some time before we can get those back up.
Thank you.
Councillor Beswick.
Thank you. This question dovetails with the previous presentation from Mr. Clemens, and I don't think that you have the ability to answer this question, although you may wish to. We indicated that a new water fee rate of $5 and that there's $2.9 million of contribution from the water fee user rate to this reservoir project. Could you please tell me what we estimate the $5 per resident or per household to generate, and how long, over what period of time is that $2.9 million anticipated?
The 5% increase that's recommended to...
Sorry, 5%, my apologies.
Well, that goes to this project, of course. It also will go towards some of the other water projects, like the expansion of supply. So I can't speak to specific details other than that each one of the projects has a funding formula that includes user fee revenue, including these increases plus the increase last year, and the recommended increase for the next several years to get the supply of user fee revenue sufficient to fund the long list of projects we have coming up, including the treatment plant, which includes this reservoir project and the expansion of supply. So it's a mix of funding sources, which includes the increased water user fees. I don't know if I answered your question, but I don't know the specific details off the top of my head, unfortunately.
So the 5% user fee increase will complement the $2.9 million user fee contribution towards this and other water projects?
Well, the 5% increase is needed to provide the $2.9 million.
And over what period of time?
25 years. From January 1st, we're recommending it be applicable right through until when these projects are completed.
And do we have what amount are we starting at in this fund of $2.9 million?
I'm not sure how much we have there right now. We'd have to get back to you with that, Your Worship.
Because we have estimated $2.9 million will come from user fees. So I assume that we've calculated that over a certain amount of percentage increase and over a certain amount of years.
The challenge I have is that this is just one of several projects that user fee is needed to cover, and I don't know off the top of my head the specific breakdown between the projects.
Okay, Councillor Hunker.
Thank you, Your Worship. I think this is all good news to protect our water supply for the future, but what I'm really excited about is the concept of power generation from the equipment that we have there. I've always hated to see that water all flowing over the dam without being taken advantage of, and I hate to see waste, and I think that's been energy wasted, and I'm glad to see that's being included in the budgeting for this project, and I know we'll be able to get some revenue out of that, which I think is one of the important things, is that we can recover some of the costs, and that'll be recovered in 3.5 years. Where can you get an investment like that? Thank you.
Good, thank you. Just a quick question. The covered, the new site that we've identified now will be enclosed. Is it going to be fully enclosed, or is it just going to have like a protective cover over the top?
I'll show you that picture. This is quite similar to the type of reservoir you'd provide, a circular reservoir. That tends to be the most economical. It's not always, but tends to be. Yes, it would be a covered reservoir. It would be a completely covered reservoir. It would be a 2-cell reservoir. That allows you to be able to take one cell out of service and go in and clean the other. You need venting on the top to let air in and out as the water level goes up and down in the reservoir. But there's various design requirements you provide to stop, obviously, birds or bugs getting into the water. And there's also, in terms of you need to pay attention to circulation. There's a number of aspects within reservoir design that are quite important.
Okay, thank you. One more question, Councillor Kip.
Yeah, just on the emergency part that somebody talked about, earthquakes. If this water system fails under catastrophic events, I guess I could use the word screwed for a while. It's going to take days and days and weeks, as any major event like Katrina or any of them that had water interruption, which is part of our emergency plan. We're weeks without sometimes good water supply, so people have to do that in part and parcel, store their survival water and have it ready. Is that Mary Ellen Drive? That picture? Is that Mary Ellen Drive?
This is a Rod
Glen on Rutherford Road.
What's the size of that one?
About 1 million gallons.
1 million gallons.
Yeah. Oh, that's 4.5 million liters. Sorry, I should speak in that.
Thank you.
If I could comment on your security system for your water. The city has steel pipelines and therefore a fairly robust water system. So many studies have shown that if you're going to have a problem with your water system in a seismic event, steel water main, welded steel water main, tends to stand up very well. And a lot of your systems are twinned as well. So as communities goes, yours is pretty good.
Excellent. I think one quick question. I think we're looking at possibly an emergency water source south of Nanaimo, and I just wondered how long would that take to, when this is concluded, and assuming we're going to put these pieces together, how long would it take to activate that water system in the case of need?
Do you want to go ahead, Tom?
We believe it would take some infrastructure to be able to get some piping connected to our system. So we're looking at, I believe, in the budget 2014 to do some work there.
But my question is that if there was a catastrophic, like Councillor Kipp had mentioned, I mean, how long, once the pipes are in, once it's all connected, how long to get water to flow on that in the case of a serious situation?
Oh, if the pipes are connected, it would be just a matter of turning the pipes on.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. Thank you, sir.
Move receipt of the delegation.
Seconded. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Okay, item 6 we're into now, delegations pertaining to agenda items up to 10 minutes. It's delegations pertaining to the 2011-2015 financial plan. Okay, we'll move on to number 7 now. That's the Mayor's report. And under this, Councillor Unger wanted to update us on the Safer Nanaimo. Oh, he's gone. He asked me to put this on the agenda. Surely he knew where this was coming anyway. Well,
I could do that
please
off
do.
the cuff, maybe. We are in the process at this point to try to get a dialogue going with all the stakeholders. That would, of course, include the Hospital Area Neighborhood Association. It might also need to include an association, if there is one, of the people who live on Bowen and Pride, which is the fourth intended spot for low barrier housing, because we are getting at this point correspondence from people in that area as well. So what we are trying to do is to organize ourselves so that we come to a point where all the questions that are still out there are going to be answered in a concise and succinct manner without we have to do that basically because there is a fair amount of misinformation out on the street, and there is a considerable amount of fear that has come with that misinformation, and so we have to deal with that. We'll listen with respect and with intent to all the stakeholders, and we're going to do our very best to come up with all the answers that might be there, and you know, we're going to have to dispel some of the myths that are out there as well. That is the intent. I think this would happen within the next 2 weeks, that we will contact at least the Hospital Area Neighborhood Association, take it from there, together with VIHA, with Canadian Mental Health, with the RCMP, so that we have a proper forum to get the information out that needs to be out. At the same time, we will still listen to suggestions, obviously, and the idea that Council is now aware of what we are doing is very important to the Safe and Nanaimo Working Group, because we, you know, in a sense, we would like to have your backing in what we're doing on the short term. In any case, everything will come to you in the form of a report once we have had the discussions, and we do that with all hope and with all good intentions.
Thank you very much. Just to point out that Councillor Pachi and Councillor Unger are both co-chairs. Did you want to add anything?
Yes, I would, Your Worship. With the weather we've been having in the last few days, the emergency cold weather strategy has kicked into place. And even though, as you may have noticed in the newspaper, there were not a large number of people using the facility, there are many others out there who often find alternate housing during that time. I know that in the past, the RCMP Bike Squad has done an excellent job of looking after the people on the street, and that includes handing out clothing to some of them, especially at this time of year when their possessions do not include good warm winter clothing and good footwear. So I checked with them this afternoon, and they would be very happy to receive any donations from the public. So if you have any heavy jackets or clothing and footwear, please drop it off at the RCMP station, and the members of the RCMP will distribute them to the people in need. And when, as forecast for the next few nights, it could go as much as minus 10 degrees. That's not the type of weather to be out in a T-shirt. Thank you.
Thank you. Move down into item 11, staff reports, community safety and development, the support for participation of the Shakeout BC drill. Staff recommendation that Council support the Great British Columbia Shakeout drill on January 26, 2011 at 10 a.m. as outlined in the report.
Move the recommendation.
And seconded? Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. DVP 970 Brecken Road. It's requested that council hear anyone wishing to speak with respect to DVP 160. Staff recommendation that council issue development variance permit number DVP 160 at 690 Brecken Road. Anyone in attendance that would like to speak to matters related to that DVP at 970 Brecken?
Move the staff recommendations.
Moved and seconded. No discussion. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Report and minutes of the public hearing held 2010 November 04 for bylaws 4000.488, 4000.489, 4000.490, and 6500.012. Staff recommendation to council receive the reports and minutes of the public hearing held Thursday 2010 November 04 for bylaws as mentioned.
Move and second.
Moved and seconded. No discussion. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Unsightly premises, 3390 Departure Bay Road. It's requested that council hear anyone wishing to speak with respect to unsightly premises at 3390 Departure Bay Road. Is there anyone in attendance that would like to speak to matters related to unsightly premises at 3390 Departure Bay Road?
Move the staff recommendation.
Seconder? Second. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Unsightly premises, 118 Halliburton Street. It's requested that council hear anyone wishing to speak with respect to unsightly premises at 118 Halliburton Street. Is there anyone in attendance to speak to that matter at 118 Halliburton Street?
Move the staff recommendation.
Moved and second. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Unsightly premises 199 Nickel Street. It's requested that council hear anyone wishing to speak with respect to unsightly premises at 199 Nickel Street. Anyone in attendance who would like to speak to matters related to 199 Nickel Street?
Move the staff recommendation.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Unsightly premises 6630 Portsmouth Road. It's requested that council hear anyone wishing to speak with respect to unsightly premises at 6630 Portsmouth Road. Is there anyone in attendance that would like to speak to matters related to unsightly premises at 6630 Portsmouth Road?
Move the staff recommendation.
All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Down to unsightly premises at 20 Prideaux Street. It's requested that council hear anyone wishing to speak with respect to unsightly premises at 20 Prideaux Street. Is there anyone in attendance that would like to speak to matters regarding 20 Prideaux Street?
Move the staff recommendation.
Second. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Overleaf to unsightly premises at 111 Terminal Avenue. It's requested that council hear anyone wishing to speak with respect to unsightly premises at 111 Terminal Avenue. Anyone in attendance who would not like to speak to matters related to 111 Terminal Avenue? Sorry? I didn't understand what you were saying.
There's a lot that's started around there.
Ms. Harrison, is this still item I still on the agenda?
Yes.
Okay.
Move the staff recommendation.
Is there a seconder?
Related to the graffiti that's on the building.
Moved and seconded. No discussion. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. The next one, J, has been removed. We'll go into K, structural removal order, illegal secondary suite, 2140 Dugan Road. Is there anyone in attendance that would like to speak to matters related to 2140 Dugan Road? Seeing none.
Move the staff recommendation.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Unresolved building deficiencies, notice on title, section 5.7. It is requested that council hear anyone wishing to speak with respect to unresolved building deficiencies or illegal suites for the properties listed below. First one is 2325 Rosstown Road, illegal construction, finished basement to include secondary suites. Anyone in attendance that would like to speak to matters at 2325 Rosstown Road? The next property is 400 Summit Drive, illegal construction, finished basement to include secondary suite. Anyone here in attendance that would like to speak to matters related to 400 Summit Drive? The third one is 615 5th Street, illegal construction, alter basement to include a secondary suite. Anyone in attendance that would like to speak to matters related to 615 5th Street? Number 4 is 2524 Labio Road, illegal construction, finished basement to include a secondary suite, and enclosed carport to create a garage. Councillor Bestwick, is this one you want to talk about?
Next one.
Sorry. Is there anyone in attendance that would like to speak to 2524 Labio Road? Do you want to move it, that one? Councillor Sherry, do you want to? Oh, sorry, we're going to go in the next one. The number 5 is 490 Hillcrest Avenue, illegal construction, landing and stairs. Councillor Bestwick?
Yes, please. Just a question to staff. This was initiated 2005 with a building permit application. 2007 it expired, and now 3 years later, 2010. Is this the same property owner? Is this just a case of we're cleaning up some old files? This is 3 to 4 to 5 years old.
Yes. It is the same owner to our understanding, and it is just as you say, we were going back through our files at first believing this construction did not take place at all, which we went out and confirmed it did not take place, but they'd done some repair work that did not comply to the building code.
So we can anticipate seeing considerably more of these if we're cleaning up some of our old files?
There certainly are some files like this where we work them in with all the other enforcement files in the secondary suites. We don't have a large amount, but there are some from time to time.
Thank you.
Is there anyone in attendance that would like to speak to matters at 490 Hillcrest Avenue? Number 6, 4864 Hartford Place, illegal construction, finished basement to include a secondary suite. Is there anyone in attendance that would like to speak to matters at 4864 Hartford Place? Seeing none. Is there a seconder?
Second the motion.
Moved and seconded. All those in favour? Opposed? Carried. Corporate Services, water and garbage rates increase bylaws. Staff recommendation that Council receive the report pertaining to 1 Waterworks Rate and Regulation Amendment Bylaw 2010 number 7004.05, Garbage and Recyclable Collection Amendment Bylaw 2010 number 7089.03, Southwest Bulk Water Rate Amendment Bylaw 2010 number 7099.01, and the final one is Municipal Solid Waste Routes E like Echo, F like Foxtrot Collection Amendments Bylaw 2010 number 7112.01. What is your pleasure?
Recommendation.
Okay, seconder? Okay, I see no discussion. All those in favour? Opposed? Carried. The item N, request to direct award computer systems recovery equipment. Staff recommendation to Council approve a sole source contract to Dell Computers for disaster recovery equipment.
Staff recommendation.
Okay, and is there a seconder on this? And Councillor Patchy, did you want to?
Thank you, Worship. I think because this is a sole source contract idea that it might be appropriate for Mr. Christensen to explain to the viewing audiences why this is the preferred way of doing it.
You're on.
Go ahead, Mr. Christensen.
Yes, Your Worship. This equipment is in addition to equipment we previously purchased before, and the Dell Equilogic equipment that we already have. This is an addition to it, so an extra box that really improves our disaster and recovery handling capabilities.
I think if I could, Mr. Christensen, I believe that this particular company that we bought previously from has since been bought out by Dell, so it's really a continuation of dealing with the same company.
That is correct, Your Worship.
Councillor Bestwick.
Thank you. Mr. Christensen, could you please refresh my memory on how much we've been asked to approve for the 2011 budget for IT upgrades?
Sorry, Your Worship.
Could you refresh my memory on how much we've been asked to for the 2011 budget for IT upgrades? This would be on top of that amount?
I'll get the Director of Finance to come back down because he may have the answer if Mr. Christensen doesn't.
Well, we're waiting if there is that catastrophic earthquake or whatever, we'll be able to have this information backed up where it took place if we approve this.
It was a 238, I think.
So Mr. Clemens is just looking up what's in the 2011 budget for information technology upgrades. That's your question, Councillor Wessler?
Your Worship, the budget for 2011 for technology upgrades is $470,000 for capital purchases.
470?
That's correct.
Although this is actually in the 2010 budget.
And so our 2010 budget for this, for IT upgrades was?
I actually don't have that in front of me, but it'll be a similar amount. It's pretty similar from one year to the next.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Unger.
So the public understands the amount of this contract is $91,692. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll move along. Oh, sorry, we have a question on that. It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Moving into water treatment plant, community services, section O, lead standard status, staff recommendation of council exempt the water treatment plant from its green building policy, lead gold.
And the staff's recommendation.
Okay, is there a seconder to get it on the table? Moved and seconded. Mr. Kenning, do you want to, or who would you like to delegate, maybe could give a staff review or report rather, on the reason that we want to exempt this from LEED Gold?
Well, I can start, Your Worship, and I'll ask staff to pick up where I missed. But the primary reason is because the LEED's system is primarily directed at residential and commercial structures, and this is an industrial type structure, and the types of recommendations that would have to be followed for a LEED's building aren't as compatible with this type of construction. But there are some major design issues in designing this building that are very green, and one of the most important ones is siting this treatment plant so that to minimize the pumping, and that has nothing to do with the actual building, but saves potentially a couple $100,000 a year in pumping costs. So there are some very green elements about the design, but not specific to the building construction as it is normally defined under LEED. Tom or Bill, do you want to pick up what I left off?
Maritan, Mr. Ketting is correct. We are working to follow as many LEED or sustainability principles in the design, and in fact, Associated Engineering, who you met Sean earlier this evening, is making sure we have a rigorous design process to be sustainable where possible. And in the report, we list some of those. So we're really quite proud of some of the initiatives taken to make sure this is most energy efficient as we can make it.
Thank you. I have Councillor Kipp and Councillor Bestwick. Councillor Kipp.
Thank you, Worship. I truly support the downscaling of our LEED standards in this because, for one thing, it's an external agency that has to give us certification and qualification. My only concern is if we would forfeit any form of grants or anything like that. So the concern with that, I'm not certain we do. But I agree with the fact that controlling our rainwater on site to mimic the natural environment, to target zero waste emissions is hugely important. And we can set a lot of those standards ourselves, especially I would consider this an industrial building. So to have the whole building and not just the office spaces and the what I'll call living areas as a LEED status is almost ridiculous. So I support the motion to downscale it.
Okay, Councillor Bestwick.
Thank you. I just wondered if this meant 100% of the build, or just a portion of it, or portions of it that would not make sense, or if there's other portions that may make sense to keep a base standard of some description for efficiencies?
Mayor Rattan, in response to Councillor Bestwick's question, really when we were looking to get this building LEED Gold certified, it was for the operational area or the office areas, and so we are going to continue with those LEED-like criteria for those areas, and we've expanded it to include sustainability on the whole site and in the process area, which is the water treatment area. So yes, we are.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, question on the motion. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. We'll move into P like Peter, Reservoir Number 1 replacement site location. Staff recommendation that Council 1 authorize the siting of a 14 million litre water reservoir in the west corner of the Colliery Dam Park adjacent to Nanaimo Lakes Road and the Nanaimo Parkway, and 2, to explore opportunities for park use of the city property on which the current Reservoir Number 1 is situated.
The staff recommendations
on 1 and 2.
Your Worship, if I may.
Yeah, well, just a second. It's been moved. Are you seconding it?
I'll second.
Thank you very much. Okay, it's been moved and seconded. It's on the floor.
And I'd like to refer the opportunities for park use to City Parks, Recreation and Culture Commission for discussion.
Second.
Moved and seconded.
Yeah, friendly amendment.
Okay, I know.
Very generous. Okay, so on the amendment, all those in favor? Opposed? Carried. And on the main motion, all those, it's only on there that we're just going to refer this back to Parks and Rec.
Yes.
I don't think we need to move on the main motion now, do you?
No.
Yeah,
You're waving.
first one is citing
Ms.
the-
Harrison is sort of waving her arm around like that.
Yeah, sorry, Anna.
You just voted to amend the second part of his motion to change it to, rather than just that council explore opportunities, that council ask the Parks, Rec and Culture Commission to explore opportunities. So I think that could be the amendment if council is agreeable that has just been passed. And now if you'd like to go back and vote on the main motion with that amendment, you could proceed
As
with that.
amended. Okay. So, all those in favor? Opposed? Carried. And School Communities Connection Grant, staff recommendation that council provide a resolution supporting the school district's application for the School Community Corrections Program. Move. Second. And any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Information items, we have... Move receipt. Is seconder? Second. Okay. Pardon me. Are there any questions regarding item 12A? Any questions rather dealing with 12B? And finally, any questions related to item 12C? Seeing none, we'll move on to reconsideration of bylaws to be moved by Councillor Unger, who is the acting mayor. Councillor Unger.
Thank you, Your Worship. I move that zoning amendment bylaw number 2010, number 4000.475, RA 235, 3443 Meadow Lane Road and 3360 and 3370 Hammond Bay Road to rezone the subject properties from single-family residential zone RS1 to steep slope residential zone RS7 in order to incorporate the properties into a comprehensive steep slope development under the RS7 zone be adopted.
Moved and seconded. See no questions. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried.
I move that zoning amendment bylaw 2010 number 4000.476, part of 3355 Meadow Lane Road and part of 3312 Hammond Bay Road to rezone parts of the subject properties from steep slope residential zone RS7 to medium density multiple family residential suburban zone RM5 in order to incorporate increased residential density within the proposed comprehensive steep slope development be adopted.
All those in favor? Oh, sorry. I'm sorry, Councillor Bestwick, you had a question?
Thank you, Your Worship. I was just going to ask a question to staff how these two properties differ in so much as their RS7s to RS5s and RS1 to RS7. How they differ.
Your Worship, there are actually all three bylaws, 475, 476, and 477 are the same development site in the Stevenson Point area. The one that is under consideration at the moment, 476, is for multi-family sites within the overall development. The development has some single-family lots, some multi-family lots, and some higher density lots, and this is the bylaw pertaining to the higher density lots.
Would they all be able to be RM5?
Just those portions that are being rezoned under this bylaw.
So would all three properties be able to have been RM5, just curiously?
No, that's not the intent of this. This is just a portion of the site to be at the higher density.
Thank you.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Go ahead.
I move that zoning amendment bylaw 2010 number 4000.477, part of 3312 Hammond Bay Road, to rezone part of the subject property from steep slope residential zone RS7 to mixed use commercial zone C4 in order to incorporate a local service center with a comprehensive steep slope development be adopted.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried.
I move that zoning amendment bylaw 2010 number 4000.488, part of 5547 Noy Road, to rezone part of the subject property from single-family residential zone RS1 to residential duplex zone, RM1, and residential triplex and quadruplex zone RM2 in order to include additional density within an approved subdivision past third reading.
Second motion.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried.
I move that zoning amendment bylaw number 4000.489, 340 Poets Trail Drive, to rezone the subject property from single-family residential zone, RS1, to low-density multiple-family residential townhouse zone, RM3, in order to facilitate construction of a multifamily development past third reading.
Second. Discussion. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried.
I move that zoning amendment bylaw number 20 or bylaw 2010 number 4000.490 at 4085 Salal Drive to rezone the subject property from low-density multiple-family residential townhouse zone RM3 to single-family residential zone RS1 in order to facilitate subdivision of single-family lots past third reading.
Second. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried.
I move that business license amendment bylaw 2010 number 5351.06 to reduce the licensing fee charged for a special event or trade show be adopted.
Second motion. Moved and seconded. Councillor Bestwick.
Thank you, Worship. From the 160 plus to the 40 plus that we're reducing this fee to, I could certainly support a daily, so if it was 40 per day or whatever the amount is, and change, but to certainly go from a 4-day event at 165 to and incorporate 3-day events, 2-day events, 1-day events, half-day events at the same amount, that doesn't begin to cover our administrative costs, I'm not able to support this.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. All those in favor? Opposed? Councillor Patchy and Councillor Bestwick opposed. Balance of council in favor. The motion passes. Go ahead, please.
I move that official community plan amendment bylaw 2010 number 6500.009 OCP 55, part of 3312 Hammond Bay Road, to amend Schedule D of the OCP to permit a local service center be adopted.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried.
I move that official community plan amendment bylaw 2010 number 6500.012 OCP 52 to include the South End neighborhood plan within the official community plan past third reading.
Moved and seconded. No discussion. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried.
I move that the official community plan amendment bylaw 2010 number 6500.012 be adopted.
Second. Moved and seconded. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried.
I move that 911 call answer levy bylaw 2010 number 7114 to provide for the recovery of costs of providing 911 service in the city of Nanaimo by means of a call answer levy be adopted.
Second the motion. Moved and seconded. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried.
I move that municipal highway naming Radcliffe Street bylaw 2010 number 7117 to rename a municipal highway be adopted.
Second. Okay. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried.
I move that sign amendment bylaw 2010 number 7118 to amend the regulations for real estate and construction signs be adopted.
Second motion. Moved and seconded. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Introduction of bylaws.
I move that Waterworks Rate and Regulation Amendment Bylaw 2010, number 7004.05, to amend Schedules A and B, past first reading.
Seconded. Moved and seconded. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried.
I move that the Waterworks Rate and Regulation Amendment Bylaw as above pass second reading.
Seconded. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried.
I move that the Waterworks Rate and Regulation Amendment Bylaw as above pass third reading.
Seconded. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried.
I move that Garbage and Recyclable Collection Amendment Bylaw 2010 number 7089.03 to amend Schedule A pass first reading.
Okay, moved and seconded. Councillor Sherry.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I think we heard a report earlier this evening from staff where there's increases in user rate fees for 2011. And our budget projection for the revenue from those services are generated on these bylaws. So what the council is doing now, my understanding, is that we are passing these bylaws now so that they will be in effect on January 1st, 2011. Is that correct?
Yes, Your Worship, that's correct.
Okay, so to give the general public an idea of exactly what the process we're going through now.
Thank you. It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Moving into...
I move that Garbage and Recyclable Collection Bylaw as above pass second reading.
Second motion.
Second. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried.
And I move that Garbage and Recyclable Collection Amendment Bylaw pass third reading.
Second motion.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried.
I move that the Southwest Bulk Water Rate Amendment Bylaw 2010 number 7099.01 to amend the rate for bulk water supply to the Southwest pass first reading.
Seconded.
Second motion.
All those in favor? Opposed? Carried.
I move that the Bulk Water Amendment Rate Bylaw pass second reading.
Second motion.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried.
And that the Southwest Bulk Water Rate Amendment Bylaw pass third reading.
Second motion.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried.
I move that Municipal Solid Waste Routes E and F Collection Amendment Bylaw 2010 number 7112.01 to amend Schedule A pass first reading.
You'll do that one, right? Okay, move to second. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried.
I move that Municipal Solid Waste Routes E and F Collection pass second reading.
Move and second. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried.
Move that Municipal Solid Waste Routes E and F Collection Amendment Bylaw pass third reading.
Second. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Very good job. Thank you. Introduction of development bylaws and the...
Move receipt of the correspondence.
Thank you. Seconder? Second. Moved and seconded. All those in favor? We'll go down to, is any business arising out of the correspondence that on either 16A or 16B?
Your Worship, no, but notice of motion, if I may, please.
Sure.
I just wish to make a notice of motion requesting staff to bring forward a report and recommendation on the implications of providing a four-man complement to our fire services. And I trust that that makes sense to the request.
Now, do you know exactly what's requested? Yes. Thank you. Good, thank you. And we'll move down to delegations. Sorry. Delegation pertaining to items not on the agenda up to 10 minutes. And moving down the question period, agenda items only.
My name is Fred Taylor of 204 Emery Way. Tonight we've heard an excellent presentation on the budget for the next few years. Same at the Finance and Policy Committee meeting. I haven't heard of any direction from council or discussion in the open here at any meeting. And also in the presentation tonight there was some items that would bring it to a zero budget. for 2011. Are those sort of things, all those still open for discussion?
Yes.
Then why would the Quarterway Bridge be advertised?
Advertised?
For construction.
Well, maybe Mr. Kenny?
Yeah, a couple of comments. Those three items, actually, one of them was the extra cost in 2011 of the four-person cruise, or not the four-person cruise, sorry, the Chase River Hall. That was, the people were hired in the mid-summer of last year. There's a full-year salary increment for this year, and so that is already a decision already made, and it's just an implication to the 2011 budget. The RCMP is the same situation. Those officers were hired already, and so, but the costs start taking effect in 2011. And with regard to Bowen Road, we're acting under the direction from Council to proceed with that project. And in fact, underground works have already taken place. There was last summer work on relocating sewer lines, so that project is proceeding unless Council directs otherwise. Expenditures will continue.
So why would Council not be looking for suggestions to bring it to a zero budget that's not already a done deal?
Yeah, go ahead.
The concept as proposed by Councillor Kipp was that we would work this coming year to do our best to get to a zero-based budget in 2012. That's what the concept was, to start working now to get it to zero in 2012, not in 2011.
I don't believe what was said here by the financial budget presentation here of a possible, what you could do for a zero budget for 2011 is a separate.
Your Worship, if I could comment on that, is that we're in the process of scheduling a number of budget meetings to assist Council in reviewing the 2011 budget. In fact, I think we've tentatively scheduled or trying to identify dates for 4 more sessions, and in each one of those sessions, Council will be reviewing individual segments of the budget, and I expect that Council will review those segments of the budget, and if any resolutions come out of that, of course, out of those review sessions, then that would be appropriate.
As you know, Mr. Taylor, we'll have a number of opportunities. Council will have a number of opportunities to review it again. It isn't going to be finalized and accepted until May of 2011.
Council has got money in the budget for an energy consultant supported by BC Hydro, I believe. Why do we have cool air coming down here on this time of year? It doesn't make sense. Heat the building, you don't need cold air in circulation. If you look at reports, even fans and ceilings and everything pushing air down in the winter chills the body. That's what it does in the summer. You don't chill the body in the winter time.
Way systems work, they heat in summer and cool in winter. Haven't you ever noticed that with air conditioning?
I can't remember who I voted for here.